Alright, so our last section of chapter 1, we're talking about comparing and ordering rational and irrational numbers. So this is very straightforward. We're going to say whether something is greater than or less than or equal to, and then we're going to take our rational and irrational numbers and put them in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. Make sure we read directions. So we're going to start by comparing the following. I'm not going to type these in. I'm going to use my perfect squares. 1, 4, 16. Oops, missed one. 1, 4, 9, 16. 25, 36, 64. See, that should be enough for what's on this paper, or on this slide. So when I look at the square root of 3, I know the square root of 3 is closer to the square root of 4. And since square root of 4 is 2, that I know that this is at least 1.5. Or, greater than 1.5. Because we're closer to the 4 than we are to the 1. Which would tell me that the square root of 3 is greater than 1. Right, and we knew that the square root of 2 was 1.41 is what we found in the last chapter. So, it's safe to say that the square root of 3 is greater than 1. So I'm going to come over here to B, and we're looking at 3 and the square root of 12. When I look at this, I have 9 and 16, right? Well, the square root of 9 is 3. Right, so this is the square root of 9. So then I just have to ask myself, which one of these is bigger? 9 or 12, and 12 is the bigger one. So 3 is less than the square root of 12. I guess I could have done that over here. Square root of 1. 1 is the square root of 1. So which one's bigger? Square root of 3. Now here we get to where we're working with fractions as well. And so now we've got to figure out, well, what is 20 divided by 9? And so I know that 9 goes into 20 twice, and that we are left with 2. So we have 2/9, which I believe is 0.2 repeating, but let's double check. So 2 divided by 9. Yep, 0.2 repeating. So we've got 2.2 repeating. And then the square root of 6, well, 6 falls between 4 and 9, right? So I know that this is greater than 4, or greater than 2. And we've got to decide, is it closer to 4 or is it closer to 9? And so I know it's closer to the 4, so I'm going to... I can do some guessing and checking. But I'm going to go with the fact that, let's see, 2.4 squared would be 5.76. So that's pretty close to 6. And if I did 2.5 squared, I'm at 6.25. So I'm guessing we're at 2.4. And if I made, just looking at these, and even though this is a repeating number, my zeros continue out forever here, and so the 4 is bigger than the 2. And so for my 20/9 compared to the square root of 6, my square root of 6 is greater than my 20/9. And you can type it in the calculator. Second square root 6, and I get 2.44. So again, 2.4 is still bigger than 2.2, even though that's a repeating 2. Alright, now we've got negatives, so we've got to be careful. 7 is between 4 and 9, and it is closer to 9 than it is to 4. So we know that this is going to be a negative 2.5 something, right? Well, probably bigger than 5 because 6 was 2.4, So if we do 2.6 squared, we still are in the 6. 2.7 squared, we're at 7.29. So then I have to decide which one of those is closer, and I'm going to say the 2.7, but let me double check. So 2.6465, right? And then here we have, and then this decimal would continue on. And here we just have a negative 2.6. So what we have to be careful of when we're working with negatives is that we actually want the numbers bigger the closer to 0 it is. And so this 2.65 is actually smaller than our negative 2.65 is actually smaller than our negative 2.6. Because negative 2.6 is closer to 0 than negative 2.65. And so we've got to kind of think the opposite when it comes to negative numbers. So, again, I, for the most part, used my approximating square roots ability as opposed to typing it in to a calculator because it just works faster that way. So now moving on to example 2, we're going to order the following from least to greatest. The first thing you want to do is to get your decimals for any fractions or square roots. But when we go to write our answer has to be in the original form. So when I do second square root of 5, I know it's 2 point and then less than 2.5. So this is 2.23. And the square root of 2 was 1.41. Right, second square root 2. Yep, 4.41. And so now I'm going to order these from smallest to largest, right? Least to greatest. So the smallest number is going to be our 4.41, which is the square root of 2. So we're going to write square root of 2, and then a comma. And now this one's been used. My next smallest number is 1.6, and that's been used. And now I'm going to look, I've got 2, 2.23, and 2.8. So 2 is going to be our next. And then our 2.23, so square root of 5. And then we end with 2.8. So again, first step is to make anything that's not a decimal into a decimal, making it easier to compare, and then order them, in this case, from least to greatest. So let's look at our last example. Order the following from greatest to least. So this is important. We're going to start with the biggest number and go to the smallest. So I'm still going to find my approximations. This is going to be 4 point something because 16 is 4. So second square root 17. So 4.12. Square root of 9 is 3. 5/3. 3 goes into 5 once. With 2 remaining, so that would be 6 repeating. 17 divided by 4. 4 goes into 17 4 times. Don't want to forget that negative. And we have 1 remaining quarter. And then the square root of 3, we know, oops. So square root of 3 is 1.73. So now I'm going to start with the biggest number, which is going to be my 3, which is actually, I'm going to write square root of 9, because we're going to write the original form. So square root of 9, and then I'm going to go to my next biggest, not the negatives yet. So I've got to decide, is it 1.73 or 1.6? And the answer is 1.73, so we're then going to have the square root of 3. And then our last positive is our 1.6 repeating, so that would be 5/3. So now I get to work into the negatives, and since we're starting with the biggest, I actually need to find the smallest negative number, and so that would be this negative 1.7. And then our next smallest negative number, or technically biggest number, is negative the square root of 17, because negative 4.12. And then we end with the negative 17/4, because it's the smallest number in the bunch at a negative 4.25. And so there is our order from greatest to least. Excuse me. So remember, change fractions and square roots into decimals. Do not drop any negative signs, otherwise that'll throw you off. And then make sure that you read your problems very carefully. On your work, I want to see those decimals, so when you're comparing square roots or fractions, I want to see the decimal form to help you compare, and I want to see on your original problem where you're finding your decimals. Now remember, we go back to the original answers when we write them in our least to greatest or our greatest to least. And that is it for Chapter 1. Until next time.